And so he's inspired by anti-fashion aesthetics and nature's symbols of rebirth, and his work accordingly explores regeneration through decay. And Dela intricately weaves rubber inner tubes into garments, narrating their past lives and speculative futures. And his art reveals the inherent beauty in what was once deemed worthless, creating storied objects rich with history and symbolism. So each piece fosters a dialogue between past and future, challenging viewers to reconsider notions of value and beauty while highlighting the potential for renewal in neglected materials. So we're very excited to have Dela here with us. We're sorry that he's not here in person, but we're excited that he has the opportunity to talk to us on Zoom. So I'll let you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me? You can hear me, perfect. So thank you once again for the introduction, and I want to say a big thank you to Prof. Nana and Prof. Goche for having me on this panel to make my presentation, and also as well for the exhibition you are seeing outside. I'm really grateful for that. So once again, I'm Dela Anyah, and my topic is titled Transforming Thai Waste, Histories, Processes, and Innovative Forms. I'm told I have 15 minutes, so I'll try and not speak too much, but then present everything I need to present within this time period. So that's me within the studio. As he mentioned, I work with inner tubes, ties, license plates, a lot of discarded materials you find in vulcanizer shops and mechanic shops around Ghana. The primary objects I use for my work. Ghana, as we know, or as some know, has a rich Thai history. From the 1950s to the 1980s, we had about 4 major companies dedicated to Thai production, and consequently the waste we are seeing now. The first was the Volta Rubber Company. The second, Ghana Thai Service, which focused on remolding and repairing damaged ties. Then we had a State Thai Corporation, and my favorite, which is the Bonsa Thai Factory. This was owned by Firestone, a US-based Thai manufacturing company. And below are images from the first from Bonsa Thai Factory in its prime, when they were manufacturing ties back in the 60s. And the middle one is from State Thai Corporation, also a nationally owned Thai making company. And Firestone, that's Bonsa Thai Factory, which is located in Bonsaso. After getting to Takwa, I believe there are a couple of Ghanaians in, so you have an idea of where Takwa is, even though I haven't been there yet. After the collapse of these 4, so I forgot to mention that these 4 companies have all collapsed, which is quite sad. The last, which is Bonsa, collapsed in the 1980s. They tried selling it to different buyers after the coups, and different governments were changing around the 70s, 80s. And after not getting a buyer, the company collapsed since the 1980s, and we haven't gotten a buyer since. After the collapse of these 4 major companies, there were 4 things that happened. The first was that there was a huge shortage of ties in the country. I got these images from the National Archives, Ministry of Information, and it was a story in 1981, Daily Graphic, which showed STC buses not being able to move that day because they couldn't have ties, and also a queue of people going to buy ties. So that shows that it had a huge impact on the nation in general when these companies collapsed. The second thing that happened was that there was an influx of imported new and used ties, home used ties as they call them, and new ties. A lot started coming to the country because now we're not producing our own. And the third thing that also happened was that because we didn't have any companies dedicated to tie production or even recycling, there was this new huge void. Now you have all these ties coming in the country, old ties that were made, but then there was no company to recycle or upcycle the damaged, the discarded ties or the future waste that we're about to have in the country moving forward after 30 years since the 80s. And another thing that happened was that the sale of used ties and the repair of these ties were done by small-scale vulcanizers, which started sprouting around the country. These are various vulcanizer shops that I've been capturing in the country on a project that I'm working on, trying to capture all the vulcanizer shops in Accra, trying to document them. Because one of the things is that most of these vulcanizer shops are on government land or people's property, people's lands, people who haven't yet begun building their houses or something like that. So some of these shops you see here will not be there in, let's say, 10 years or 5 years. And I was really inspired by the idea of documentation, which I got from James Barner, of capturing the era right now as it is in 2024. What would this look like in a couple of years' time? And also documenting the various places where these tire waste is heaped around the country. So in all these places, you see a lot of tire waste here. Most of the tires there are not going to be changed. They are old tires that were left by people who had changed their tires. Some are very damaged, so they cannot be used again. But then most of the vulcanizers use them as signboards, because anytime you're driving past them and you see a huge stack of tires, you know there's a tire changing center around. So these were taken, as I said, various places in Accra, Achimota, Aveno, and all the way to Kasua. So let's take a huge radius where I captured these, and I have others I've captured as well. So these are springing up after the collapse, and they have been taking care of our tire repair needs, and have also been places where we are piling up all these discarded tires around the country. And that's where my journey begins. So my journey began particularly in this shop. He's called Rahim. He's on the motorway. And the interesting story is that I had this idea of working with ties a long time ago, because I had this tie strip in my studio. And when I started having these ideas of like creating installations out of them for some reason, but I didn't know how to get the ties, because I never I didn't buy the tie that was in my studio, and I didn't know how to turn the idea into something bigger. So it was just like a floating idea in my mind. So the other day I was going to church, and right on the way, my tie started vibrating. So then I just pulled up to this shop and began asking him. The idea popped up again. I was like, let me just ask him what a tie, like a various parts of ties are. So I asked him, are there any soft parts of the ties? Because I'm having this idea to make an installation. And he just takes me to the back and shows me something called an inner tube, which I didn't even know what it was. He showed me an inner tube and showed me how soft it was. And at that point, I was in love, and I just knew that this was the material that I had been dreaming about and that I had to work with. So he's Rahim, and I began working with him, buying stuff from him. I've done installations in his vulcanizer shop. And he's a great guy. In case you're in Ghana, you need ties or have your ties repaired, he's a great guy to talk to. So another thing is that these inner tubes are usually bent by the vulcanizers. Most of them just have it within the ties you see around here, and they don't use them for anything because no one really has any use for them in Ghana. And they're usually bent. And the issue with burning inner tubes is that it releases a lot of greenhouse gases like sulfur dioxide. I mean, there's a lot of sulfur in ties, which is what is used for the vulcanization. Sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, amongst other gases, are all in these ties. And they're usually just burnt around the country. Sometimes I just miss purchasing some, because immediately I get there and I ask if they have any, they tell me they just burnt it. And to me, I find it sad, because yes, it releases, it contributes to climate change and everything, as well as it's something which I realize no one sees the value in, and which I have begun seeing a lot of huge potential in. So this is where my journey began. And the more I went to these places, that is Rahim's place and other vulcanizer shops around the country, I started seeing other waste material, that's metal scraps, bicycle, like in the bicycle you see right there, which I hope he'll give to me soon. Bicycle scrap and license plates and everything. I want the spaces, and this began inspiring even newer works. So you see from the work installed within Moody has a lot of license plates as well in it. Upcycling. So the first image you see here is an inner tube, a butyl inner tube. So that's actually where I got my studio name from, which is Afrobutylism. They are butyl inner tubes, which is it's not it's a synthetic type of rubber, which is obviously being synthetic and not natural. It doesn't decompose as easily as the natural rubber, and it takes anywhere from over 50 to 1,000 years, depending on the grade, to decompose. So we have a lot of this sitting around different parts of the world, and the same components are in bicycles, like what you see down there, bicycle and what's it called, the inner tubes. They're all scattered around the place. They are posing a lot of issues, and they have no solution. And that's kind of like what I saw my studio doing, providing a solution to this particular problem by turning them into artworks. So below is also like license plates, which we get around from the various mechanic shops around the country. Any broken down vehicle which has been discarded there for like years, we just negotiate with the owner, and I do all to like cut them so that it's not necessarily tied to any particular like vehicle, because now it's been broken into different pieces. And it's either so what usually happens with license plates, that it's that left there, or they are turned into cobots by the scrap dealers who come to pick some of them up as well. So above is me working on one of the sculptures, and I don't know if it's very visible on your screens, but I use rivets to hold them, which is a fashion technique I guess I picked up growing up. My mom is a fashion designer, so growing up, I saw her workshop was in the house, and I picked up a lot from her, like working with the artisans, working with scissors, rivets, things like that. I picked it up from her. So I apply a lot of weaving techniques for each of the works to make it what it is. And these are two works. This was shown in Michel Nash, which is the larger one, where I began incorporating jute sacks and inner tubes. I realized that they kind of complement each other. One is that the jute sacks are lighter in weight, and it was also one of the waste materials which was lined my studio. Actually, one of the first materials I discovered back in, was it like 2018, in a warehouse that I used to work with, my dad's warehouse I used to work in a long time ago. I found it on the floor and I fell in love with it back then before I actually evolved into using inner tubes. And the second one is also like a work. You can see that the second one is a little darker and looking more varnished because I did varnish it to give it that polished feel. And this is kind of like two variations of my work done with the license plates. And this is in Copenhagen, where I also exhibited the work. So yes, I'll end my presentation here because I guess my 15 minutes are almost up. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a Q&A session, so any questions or comments from the audience members? And if you cannot hear us, please let us know as well.
Okay, I cannot hear you.
Thank you. This was really interesting. I'm wondering whether you could go back to the last slide where we actually
The last slide.
see...
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm wondering, how big are these pieces?
Okay, so the first one with the jute sacks is 250 by 250 centimeters. That's about 98 by 98.1 inches. So that's quite huge. It's like, yeah, I get lost in it, but it's quite huge. It's actually one of the second largest that I've done using this material. Yeah. And sorry, the second it's the second is like 100 by 100 as well. Yeah.
Thank you for this delicious presentation.
Thank you as well.
I really so I'm from Ghana, and
Yes.
I just like your emphasis on weaving, right? Because I think there's something quite special with how you are using your artwork to weave times, right? And so you just had mentioned just how there is this the tires have a life that they are immortal, right? Like there's a certain immortality to the tires. And you bring in weaving them in this way, right? Tells me a lot about the immortality, that you are also producing a certain immortality, right, by weaving multiple times. And as you even play with the license plates, I'm intrigued by what license plates, number plates, I would say in Ghana, mean, because they are kind of identity.
Exactly.
Right? They embody, they are extensions of the drivers, the owners. Like when a car has a license plate, it's really an extension of the driver. So not only are you weaving, but I'm interested also in how you are remixing, right? You are remixing license plates with this. But one of the challenges that I think I'm going to be leaving this symposium with is because I'm running away from repair as a framework. I don't think it's adequate. I'm running away from restoration as a framework. It sounds like gentrification. And I'm wondering whether like you are proposing a kind of weaving, or remixing. I mean, even that still, but like I feel like that's what I'm leaving your presentation with, as well as this conference, as a way of thinking about what can we do from here on out, you know?
Mhm.
So I think it was just a comment, it wasn't a question.
Okay.
Sorry.
I actually find that really amazing. Like, can I comment on that before? Okay, so comment.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, like I just found what he said really interesting about the immortality part, especially because it's like it's gonna outlast a lot of us, you know. So I find it really because plastic and rubber are kind of like the same, all these polymers which are gonna outlast us, and it's just it can take a conversation to a different dimension, especially when you fuse it with the idea of identity, like us living beyond, you know. So that's just what I found interesting about what you were saying. And it was just the restoration part that I wanted to get more clarity on what you spoke about restoration, whether that was from like a curatorial or a museum restorer type of question or comment, or was it about like us restoring industrial, you know, objects within our homes and our spaces? I just wanted clarity on that.
No, restoration in the sense of like a curative, you know, cure, right? Like, you know, this is how we fix this. And
Okay.
I am actually against cure. I think that is my position because I don't think restoration is it. And your work is really showing me other ways of imagining how
Oh,
we
okay.
deal with this conundrum. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, okay, I get it. I got it. Thank you.
Okay, Dela, thank you so much for this. I think now I have an excuse to come to your studio. So I think that is all. So I'm just going to come to the studio with one of the souvenirs here that wife gave us the bath. I use that as an excuse and tell you I'm bringing you that gift, and then I get to have a free day at your studio.
The doors are wide open for you.
Thank you. So my two questions. So when you use the number plates, does it
Yeah.
speak to the year that it was done? Does it? So do you pick number plates like you know how in Ghana we have the number plates that goes with the year? So the identity of the cars is you have a number, the year, and then of course the alphabet, right? So if it's
Yeah.
2022, then you know that. So are you picking that to show the art in terms of the year the art was made? Does that speak to any form of identity that you'd want to bring to bear? Now, the second one for me, the one hanging in Copenhagen or so, looks really nice. I think it's because of the polish. Do you use anything to do the polish that could potentially also be toxic, or is it something that could potentially also happen? Because I think that is why I want to agree with Kwame a little bit on the whole repair and that conversation, because in trying to bring things to life, sometimes the process in doing that also means that we bring more toxicity into the whole approach of bringing things back to life and to make it a bit shiny and brilliant for the eyes. So I want you to delve a bit deeper. And then the last one is maybe if you can explain what the right side art means, the one with the card tie. I'm very curious about it.
Oh, okay.
You have
All right.
3 questions.
All right. So,
Thank you.
oh no, I got it. So the first question with the dates on the license plate. No, so the interesting thing is I'll just tell you one story. Recently, I think that was like 2 weeks ago. I was I was taking pictures of various vulcanizer shops. And in one place, I just saw a license plate on the floor and asked him, "Hey, do you want to sell that to me?" And he said, "Oh no, why would I want to sell it?" And he just gave it to me. So isn't really about the date, or it's just what I see. And they always think I'm crazy because they don't know what I'm going to use all these discarded materials for. And the most recent ones I have are, let's say, the DV plates, because whenever cars come in, they need to be changed quickly. Especially even the DP, direct from port plates, they last for a short period of time. So they're like, I have a lot more of the reddish types. But with the yellow, that's the taxi, and the other types, I usually get the older models. That's like the P's and the B's. I've never really gotten the earlier. I wish I could get some from the 80s, that black type. That'll be for a work I would really cherish. But then I haven't found those yet. So it's really any plate I find. And when I started getting them, there was this thing about the Ghanaian identity that was always going through my mind, because it's like whenever I see my work, there's a lot about identity inside it, from the plates to even the names I give the works. I give the works, I can give the works away names because I first of all, I can't speak Ewe. I'm a Ghanaian, I can't speak Ewe. And I was trying to explore my African identity. So I began giving them African names. Then when I got the plates, it was also speaking to the identity. Like you see the works, you see these plates, you're like, hey, this is from Ghana. And it's just speaking to, okay, different levels of that identity. So it wasn't to do with the time by itself, what I find, and also about that aspect of identity. With regards to the toxicity, I use wood varnish, which is very safe to use. It's quite interesting because this rubber and I'm using wood, but then fun enough, it really works really well because I began by using lacquer, which is a normal lacquer like that, let's say woodworkers use, and varnish, but then that didn't work well for me. So I moved on to the non-toxic version of the wooden varnish, water-based varnish, and I use it more for cleaning and for letting, giving it this finish, which is, as you see here. So cleaning and giving it its nice finish. And when I put in the sun, it gives it this, this beautiful colors, these brownish dark colors come out of it. So I experiment with it just to give it that feel, but then it's not toxic as far as I'm concerned. Else, I guess a lot of the tables that we find around will be toxic to touch. So yeah, so far that isn't toxic. And yeah, but then lately I began exploring more of the plain ones like you see in the next one. You get like the bigger one you have over here where I don't varnish them because I'm guessing like seeing the natural feel is also something that I'm trying to experiment more with. So it's not always about giving the shininess, but then I guess it's different ways I'm trying to explore the material, and also to make sure that I don't use any toxic stuff, like whether it's DDT to treat anything to make sure termites don't chew it up. I stay away from all of that. It's just usually anything that artists use in their studio because I began with paint and normal varnish before I evolved here. So yeah. And the last question you asked, if I could have the, pardon me?
There was a story behind.
Thank you. Was the story behind the art with the car tie, the one on the right side?
Or the bicycle tie.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is that I always have this, I won't call it generic story, but then it's an overarching statement. The overarching statement is what I infuse into all, like for this series, the overarching statement that I infuse into all of them, which is, it's the idea of being reborn. You know, like I see these objects that are as nothing. They're just seen, even the vulcanizers have no respect for them. And it goes through a process whereby it's transformed and it has a higher value. To me, I'm really like thinking about life and how many people go through life in different states of their life where they feel like, okay, I'm useless, I'm worthless, I've been through this. People don't think I'm good for anything. And all of a sudden you go through a process and you're transformed, like kind of like a butterfly, become something better than you ever thought you could be. You know, and that's how I see these objects, like objects that has nothing, you probably write them off, no one thinks they have value, and it goes to the studio, which is the process, it's transformed, you know, and becomes something which has immense value. So that is the idea, and that's where the naming also comes in, because, you know, in Ghana, we have these naming ceremonies where children are given names based on circumstances behind their birth. So with everyone, like, depending on what's happening around the time I give it a name, what happened in my life, I just give the work a name, kind of like it's being ushered into the world. After going through the rebirth process, I just give it a human name so that it feels more like a human, like, or like a person. So all my first series all have like human names, whether it's Ewe. Before I began moving to Yoruba, because Yoruba and Ewe names had some similarities, and also Yorubas are tied to Gans, have a connection with Gans. And I began exploring Igbo names as well because they had the same similarities, all the uplifting kind of names, you know. So I guess that's the underlying meaning that goes to my work, the idea of value from no value and rising from the ashes, as you might say, you know, and becoming something. And yeah, so all the objects you see there have that past story where they were worthless, and now they've come together as a unit, you know, yeah, to become something of value. Yeah. So that's what it is.
My experience has been often that when citing our intellectual histories, the intellectual histories of our work, the expectation is that we cite a laundry list of disciplinary fathers. I'm deeply appreciative of you citing your mother as someone who you're drawing on methodologically. I was hoping that you might be able to speak a bit more to the influence of your mom in on your work? That's the first question. And then I hear in your response to the last question a way of getting at my second, which has to do with what you imagine the political and ethical stakes of your work to be. If we're sort of defining politics, I'm a little Foucauldian. So right, I'm thinking ethics more or less as the relationship that one sort of cultivates with themselves. What is our relationship to ourselves? And so what kind of relationship to the self does your work when you imagine someone interface with it is made possible? And then secondly, politics, again, you know, in the way that I'm sort of understanding the term, having more or less to do with the material effects our existence has in the world. What is impacted? What is affected by virtue of the matter of your work existing? How do you understand the ethics and the politics of your work is the second question. And if you might be able to reflect a bit more for us, what you are inheriting methodologically from your mother.
Okay. So I'll say my mom, thank you for your question. I'll say my mom has had a huge influence on my work because she has always had her workshop in her house, that's in our home. So came from school, was drawing in her workshop. I found materials in her shop, and I was basically like always in her workshop. And even the way my studio is structured right now was influenced by what I saw growing up, because she always had like artisans or tailors in the house, and I'll go there to worry them a bit and try to sew my own thing. And right now, when I have like assistants in the same way, like it's kind of like repeating what I've seen her do. And also, like, even the first level of works I was doing, I was incorporating pleats and things based on some clothes I'd seen her make during her fashion show days and everything, because I did model for her as well. So I would say like, and also because of her, I realized I started reading about fashion. Even though I didn't see myself becoming a fashion designer, I was just so really interested in fashion. And I guess reading about all of that has really pulled into my work because I'm inspired by avant-garde fashion, you know, and how they create works that seem to be like sculpture, like especially like a Ray Karakubo and a lot of these avant-garde artists, Tonga Degason, who's one of my favorites. And so I'll say she's had a huge influence in giving me that desire for fashion and also been pushing my work. I remember the first time she saw my work, she asked if I was making a garment. And I took that as like a green flag, let me put it that way, because it was like, okay, like this avant-garde idea I'm getting is kind of like kicking off, or it's taking shape, you know. And so I'll say she's had a huge influence creative wise in my work, and now she's always like giving idea, saying, okay, how about you add that, how about you add that, and sometimes I'm just like, let's relax, because she's always referencing her fashion show days and giving ideas. So I'll say she's had a huge influence. And also with regards to like even the bigger ideas about life and how we see our work, she is a reverend. So you can imagine like being in living with a reverend and all my life and seeing her like go through her reverend, everything she is as a reverend, comes with this idea of, okay, like you thinking about life, because it makes you ask yourself bigger life questions, because she's always like pushing me and asking questions like, okay, what is the bigger like impact behind your work? Because she's always pushing for something bigger, not just about, okay, you're an artist, but then what's the bigger message you're trying to say with your work? You know, how is this work going to impact lives? You know, how is it going to speak to life and life? Because so I think that's to paraphrase. So I think whenever I see my work, and especially the period I was going through around the time I began working with the ties, I always think of this idea of like me looking at the work and asking myself this one question: how do I see if this was a mirror, how do I see myself in the work? Do I see where the objects had been? Have I been in a place like that before? And is there hope that I can actually be to a finished place like this where I have value? You know, because I recall like times in school where you just feel like, okay, because I went through a rough season in school where I had to like resit a lot of papers and everything else, trying to find my identity, because art was something that I learned, you know, YouTube and other spaces. It wasn't something I went to school to learn. So it was a lot of me finding my identity and everything. So at the point I found it, you know, like questioning yourself, questioning value. And at the point I found it, I felt like I'd come to the finished stage of this work. Like at the place where you're unsure of who you are, trying to find your value, then you come to a place of, okay, this is who I am. You know, this is my purpose. This is my, like, who I'm supposed to be. And now I have value. You know, so I think the work began as like a personal journey and reflecting on life, on our own personal experiences in life and how we can make impact, realizing that there isn't like an end, like let's say life is like an ups and downs, and it's not a race, as my dad always says. It's not a race where someone will feel like, okay, I got here before you, I achieved this before you, but we are all going on the journey and just realizing that you can rise up, and you can be something, you can be who you are meant to be, who you're born to be, who you're destined to be. You can be that person. And you don't have to, yeah, so like I guess that's the bigger thing I always think about when I see my work, and even the new works I'm doing and everything is the one thing that keeps coming to my mind, the idea of value, the idea of rebirth, the idea of transformation, the idea of coming out of nothing to become something, So those are the bigger life questions that, like, when people see my work, I just want them to think about, because when you see the raw states, like the raw states of this, like when you see it in this raw state, the last thing you think about is something coming out of this. It's on the floor, you can see it dirty, it's just lying somewhere. No one thinks this can become something. And I guess that's how we see certain people are written off in life, like you can never amount to anything in life. I mean, certain people are told that by their teachers, you will never amount to anything, and you're probably as dirty as this and feel like you have no hope. But the mind is that you can see the work, and if you see its past state, you can realize that, oh, there's hope in life, So hope is like a big thing that I really think about. And that's why you see all these things about identity, transformation, everything, because as it evolves, I believe that will become clear. And the more I write about my work and document my work and it clarifies, I guess, we realize that the key thing that has always been, always going to be in, is this idea of hope, in the work, and for us to think about the bigger life questions. Yeah. I hope I did answer your question.
Thank you so much. This work is so rich. I once had a conversation with the Senegalese artist V.A. Diba. V.A. Diba, I'm not sure if you know his work, but he said he sees discards or found objects or waste as being a foundational element of African art in general. And so one can think about Ella Natsui or Colin Sekajuga.
Yeah.
There's so many examples of people doing work with found objects like yourself. So I'd love to hear from you. Why do you think that might be the case, and what does it mean for you to use discarded objects?
Yes, yeah. That's a fantastic question. So I began as a painter like in 2012. And the interesting, I'm going to get things. So the interesting thing is that I was inspired by Picasso. I was painting like him. At one point in time, I realized I wanted to understand his history, the history of what made Picasso's work good, because every time I painted, I was told that it's like Picasso, it's copying and everything. So when I delved into history and I realized that there was some African art inspiration, I was like, okay, what makes African art so good? Or like, how can I learn from African art, like from way back then? So in doing my research, I just realized that a lot of African artists were using discarded material, on this website, like discarded material, found objects, like hair, bones, for the mask that were used for certain ritual ceremonies or other spaces, even found wood and everything. So that became like a core thing that, like, it became ingrained in me that, hey, like, maybe the roots of what you call African art, there's something about using found objects, because the farthest history I could find was people who use found objects. So I gave up painting and I was like, okay, I'm going to find the found objects that speaks to me. And around that point in time was when I discovered Dela Anyah's work. The interesting thing was that because I was now delving into art, I didn't know his name. I just saw this beautiful piece, made out of, tins and bottle caps. And it was later on I realized who he was, and I saw his body of work, and I was like, whoa, this is a revelation. This is beautiful, So Dela Anyah, Serge. And the interesting thing is how, just in Ghana, like most of the major artists that I know who use found objects on the global art scene are, Serge Atukwefio, he uses the gallons, then Dela Anyah with the bottle caps, and Ibrahim Mahama begin with the jute sacks and hostel beds like he used recently, and other found objects. So I guess there's something, I don't know if it's a Ghanaian thing or it's in our DNA or something, but then there's something about found objects and Africans, I guess. I was trying to understand what it was about using objects, but then one thing that when you go around town, a lot of people there's this idea of using something that already exists, like the idea that you just don't throw anything away. Like a Frytol gallon can become something used to fetch water. So the idea that nothing is thrown away and everything has use is something that I guess you see when you're growing up, irrespective of where you live in the country. You see that once you come to art, there's this idea that, okay, I can use something. Which means like I keep every box. Like I had my Apple boxes for like over 10 years when I first had my first iPhone. Like nothing is thrown away. It's you keep it and you don't even know where you're going to use it for. I guess maybe that's how I also grew up. I didn't know why. But then when I began, before I started using the inner tubes, I had a lot of gallons, that's like water bottles in my studio. I didn't know what I was going to use it for. But the idea that there's use in this thing that people throw away was always with me. Like I remember this company, Trashy Bags, they make bags out of like water bag sachets, so it's like I'm saying you grew up in a scene, people using discarded items, and it's like it shows the possibility that it's possible. So yeah, so I guess maybe the earliest African artworks did that, and around us we see people using old objects for something new. So I guess that really inspired me, and so that's one of the core things that inspired me when I began researching on what objects to use in my African arts research. That was like back in 2018. Yeah. So yeah, right about that.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Session. We really lament that you couldn't be here.
Likewise.
Those in the audience, his artwork, you can see it right behind me over there. So you can go and see what he's done. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much as well. Thank you so much.